Everyone. My name is Lily. I'm with Critical Resistance, our campaign director. And I want to just thank everyone for joining, in particular our speakers. And before we get started, we'll give people a few more minutes and we'll start with showing a recent video that Survival Media Agency put together about Stop Urban Shield's victory at the Alameda County Board of Supervisors. And then we will get more into the meat of this call and hearing from all of our speakers about the Stop Urban Shield campaign and that recent victory. So I believe I'm going to queue up that video. And here we go.
San Francisco Board of Supervisors put a resolution forward asking you to suspend Urban Shield. You know that various cities, including Berkeley, are considering pulling out of Urban Shield. You know that the Oath Keepers were welcomed into Urban Shield last year. You know that ICE participated in Urban Shield last year. You know that the sheriff has exploited disasters like the ghost ship, where we have survivors today ready to speak about that.
Urban Shield is inherently racist, given its Islamophobic and anti-Arab trainings and rhetoric. Urban Shield trains officers to see people that look like me and my family as threats. It trains officers to see black males, black families as threats. This is state-sponsored violence against black families. These families live in fear of police brutality every single day.
To learn how to kill me and how to defeat me. Stop created to silence public dissent, especially that of people of color, especially that of black people.
Great. Thank you, Jess. So again, welcome. My name is Lily. I work as the campaign director here at Critical Resistance and have been also participating in the Stop Urban Shield Coalition. We want to thank everyone for joining this call. We host donor calls 4 times a year on different topics, and those are a space for us to engage our donors to critical resistance on the issues that we work on and hear from you about your reflections on our work. We have decided to open up this call to everyone because we feel it's such an important topic to celebrate our victories together and as widely as possible in order to continue momentum in our campaigns. So this call, we're joined by members from the Stop Urban Shield Coalition who have been active over the years in building towards the recent victory against Urban Shield in Alameda County. So thank you to all of our speakers who have joined. We have Lara Kiswani from the Arab Resource and Organizing Center. We have Tash Nguyen from Ella Baker Center, Maisa Morrar, who is a part of Oakland Power Projects and the Palestinian Youth Movement, and Charlene Khoo with Critical Resistance Oakland. This is how the call is going to work. So we will spend a few moments, I'll just go over a little bit about what Urban Shield is as the program, who's been fighting it, and a little bit about why we've been waged in this campaign against Urban Shield. And then we'll hear a couple of rounds of responses from our speakers that we have here with us today. And then we'll open up for Q&A for the last half hour of the call, half hour to 20 minutes. So we really welcome you to join in. If you're have been active with the campaign, we welcome your reflections. If you are in another city that's also fighting police militarization, we really welcome you to build with us and connect with us today and into the future as well. Just logistics, if you find that you're not talking until the Q&A, please mute yourself if you somehow get off mute. And then otherwise, we should be good to go. All right, so just a little bit about the Stop Urban Shield Coalition. We want to first give credit where credit is due. Critical Resistance organized this call, but the majority of our work is really movement building work and coalition building and coalition participation work. We believe that that's the way that we will win strong campaigns and build towards justice. So just to mention a few of the organizations that have been involved first in the Stop Urban Shield Coalition. There's War Resisters League, who helped to get this campaign off of the ground, American Friends Service Committee, 67 Sueños, Chicano Moratorium Coalition, Bayan USA, the Anti-Police Terror Project, the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, Catalyst Project, Interfaith for Black Lives, International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network, Jewish Voice for Peace, Bay Area Chapter, Palestinian Youth Movement, SURGE, and of course the others on this call, the Arab Resource and Organizing Center, the Ella Baker Center, Critical Resistance Oakland, and the Oakland Power Projects. And I take the time to list out those coalition members, and there may be others as well who have participated over the years, because I think a lot of the power in the work against Urban Shield came from building a strong coalition with strong political unity, sometimes struggling through differences, building a broad base of support in different communities, and then engaging a high level of commitment and accountability from different organizations. And that helped to lead us to where we are today, and hopefully will help us to continue in this fight against Urban Shield and police militarization. So just a little bit about Urban Shield. You know, we engaged in this fight against Urban Shield because it's emblematic of the rise of militarized policing. It uses the war on terror logic in order to increase policing of Black and Brown communities and policing towards political repression. It engages the systematic stripping away of community-based emergency preparedness and recovery and prevention programs. And it continues the expansion and the growth of the daily policing of Black, Brown, Indigenous, and immigrant communities. So Urban Shield is by no means the only program of this type in Alameda County, certainly anywhere across the country and the world, but we believe that Urban Shield is a linchpin in our struggle against militarized policing. Urban Shield started in 2007 as the video laid out. It's the largest international SWAT training, and it's held annually in Alameda County, California. And it includes local, regional, national, and international participants. It's primarily policing agencies, SWAT departments, but also fire and other emergency medical services and rescue teams participate. International participants typically include countries that are well known for their repressive police forces, such as the Mexican Federal Police, the Israeli Defense Forces, and the Jordanian State Police. Sheriff Ahern, the sheriff of Alameda County, runs the Urban Shield program. He created the program in 2007, and he gets money through the Department of Homeland Security to run the program. It's through what's known as the Urban Area Securities Initiative Fund, which requires this nexus to terrorism, really requires that that emergency preparedness, we shift away from emergency preparedness, the everyday emergency preparedness that our communities face, and towards a lens of looking at terroristic threats, which we know to oftentimes use racial profiling in order to advance the repression of communities of color. Urban Shield costs about $2.5 million. That's money that could be spent on other types of emergency response and prevention, and we've seen that stripping away systematically in Alameda County of community-based, church-based, school-based emergency preparedness programs over the course of the 10 or so years that Urban Shield has been in play in Alameda County. So I just want to say a couple of points on what happens at Urban Shield. A few of us finally gained access to Urban Shield this past year to serve as, to be able to monitor the activities. So Urban Shield is primarily a one-day weapons exposition where different vendors from global weapons companies come and they show off their newest equipment, sniper rifles, assault rifles, facial recognition, and other surveillance type technology, drones, things of that nature. The police departments get to speak with them about the cost of those weapons, about potentially securing those weapons for their departments, and then also the departments get to try out and the SWAT teams get to try out those weapons. And they try out those weapons over the course of a 2-day SWAT competition that is really focused on neutralizing threats rather than de-escalation, rather than engaging communities in response to emergencies, which really leads to what we saw in observing Urban Shield and what we've noticed over the years and heard over the years, which is really a shoot to kill mentality. And that's the mentality then that police forces return to communities with and go into those communities with a threat, with a thought of those communities as a threat or as an enemy, right? That needs to be repressed or neutralized. So at Urban Shield, we see how these police agencies strengthen their power to respond to emergencies, to replace community-based organizing in everyday emergencies and environmental emergencies, purchase weapons, and then increase their abilities and capacities and technology for the everyday policing and repression of Black, Brown, Indigenous, and immigrant communities, not just in Alameda County, but all over the country, and exchanging techniques with countries globally as well. So that's just a little bit about Urban Shield. I think that to give a little bit of grounding for people who are less familiar, with it. And what we'll do right now is get into the meat and the substance of this conversation, talking about the campaign to end urban shields, and what was our recent victory? How do we hold on to that? How did we achieve it? And where do we go from here in terms of fighting police militarization? So I'm going to kick us off with a first question, or first two questions, which are first for each individual or organization to answer what tactics and strategies your organization and the communities that you represent brought to this campaign, and what is the impact and significance of the victory that we achieved last month in terms of getting Alameda County Board of Supervisors to say Urban Shield will not go forward as it has in the past in 2019. So we're going to start with Lara Kiswani from the Arab Resource and Organizing Center. Welcome, Lara, and if you would kick us off. Thanks.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're great.
Great. So in terms of the tactics and strategies we tried to employ both as AROC and as a coalition, one of the primary ones was cross-movement building. As soon as some of the two organizations, Critical Resistance and AROC, became aware of this campaign from War Resisters League, we knew we needed to build out a coalition that really represented all the different folks impacted by militarization and policing. And so that was at the heart of sort of the approach that we took moving forward. Also, for AROC in particular, it was given that this was a training that happens on the weekend of 9/11 every single year, and that frames, primarily the Arab terrorist as the basis for a lot of the trainings and the justification for Urban Shield to exist in the first place. It was essential that we also play a leading role in challenging it based on that, but also to provide a broader framework for how to understand militarization and policing, and seeing 9/11 as a justification to further criminalize other Black and Brown communities. So we both felt it was a responsibility to take a stand against it, but also a way to bring in all other communities impacted by policing and to broaden the framework and understanding of how that plays out and why we should challenge it. We also made sure to have faith, labor, and community orgs. So there was a diversity of the type of organizations which have different pools and influences on the decision makers. Essentially our tactics and strategies involved a lot of power mapping and deciding who has power and sway over to make this decision. It involved a lot of research to figure that out. And it also involved a lot of work to bring our base to understand what Urban Shield was. When we first started getting involved in this campaign, most people didn't know what Urban Shield was. And so we had to do a lot of popular education and making sure our base understood what it was. And for instance, for AROC, the Israel connection was essential and the 9/11 connection was essential. And we used that to really deepen the understanding in our own community of the impact of policing by explaining that they're collaborating with local police and other agencies. So while the Arab or Muslim community may or may not have turned out against police violence particularly, they are going to turn out against Israeli violence and militarization of the Arab and Muslim quote-unquote terrorist and criminal. So we were able to make those intersections, and that also broadened, I think, the base of support that we built and the way in which Urban Shield just became a really toxic thing in the Bay Area. Everyone knew it was bad. And at some point, because of War Resisters League and other partners around the country, it became a national issue. And everyone heard about Urban Shield and understood it to be something to be challenged. So broadly speaking, I think some of the takeaways in terms of tactics and strategies are that we made the Stop Urban Shield Coalition relative to the political moment. So every year and every moment when something happened, that we made sure we connected it to militarization, policing, health, well-being. Urban Shield really involved so many different issue areas that a lot of us care about and work on. So when anything happened in the world that seemed to resonate with folks, we made sure to draw a connection to Urban Shield and why it is that people should stand against Urban Shield. Whether it was Ferguson, and right after the Gaza massacre, the first thing we did right after we mobilized for Block the Boat, the next thing we took on was Urban Shield and made sure people understood the direct connections between the two, but also the connection with Ferguson and policing. Or whether it was the Trump era and ICE and immigration. So time and time again, we made sure to reassess our talking points and how we were being relevant to people and what they cared about. But also bringing in people that care about these issues because they are the ones most impacted. So while we're making it relevant to the moment, we were also bringing the relevant voices to the table. They were the ones really speaking in the media and representing the politics and shaping the work and the strategy of the coalition. The other was escalating tactics. So we didn't just march and rally every time. We rallied the first couple years, and then we ended up getting, and we also pressured them and lobbied them to stop hosting it. We won that. And then we slowly started to escalate tactics when we realized the decision makers weren't actually listening to us and weren't going to shift. And so we ended up shutting down Urban Shield at some point in 2015, if I got it right. And, at the Pleasanton Fairground. And so disrupting Urban Shield and making a big noise about it in Pleasanton in the middle of nowhere once they moved it out of Oakland, knowing that we had to escalate strategies and tactics in order to keep them, keep people paying attention to something that was no longer happening in Oakland, but impacting people across the Bay Area and across the country. And we lobbied. So we lobbied a lot of supervisors. We lobbied a lot of decision makers behind the scenes. We engaged them on their terms. We took part in the task force that was created. So both in terms of engaging them on their terms so that we could unpack their arguments, but also for information gathering. So by engaging them on their terms, we became relevant because we're at the table with them as experts on the issues, but we also were able to gather a lot of information we may or may not have been able to gather had we not participated in some of those conversations. And I think the other another important thing to mention is the structure of the coalition, the structure and the points of unity. So from the very beginning, we had a very clear structure where we centralized the leadership of impacted communities in terms of the strategy of the coalition. So that was held with the groups of people that we considered to be leaders in terms of impacted communities in the Bay. But also a structure around it was really a democratic process where we brought in all kinds of people to partake in the coalition work, to play a role and to have some leadership, and also to maintain clear politics. So while this could be seen as a reformist type of thing, we made sure that it was a radical reform in some way, that it was actually shifting conditions and had remained clear politics, was never saying that policing is only bad because of X, Y, Z, but that this is a way that really Urban Shield exposes why policing is an issue and why militarization is an issue. So maintaining the politics kept our people engaged. I think it kept people feeling excited about it and felt connected to it, and also made sure that we were able to maintain the integrity of what it is we all came together around. Now, in terms of the impact of the win, when we finally won, I will say that when we won, it took a couple of months of really hardcore organizing and lobbying and coming together and pushing ourselves day in and day out to put whatever pressure we could, using this political moment and the information we learned about Urban Shield to encourage decision makers to shift. And we were able to do that, and that was a great win. And it was a great win because it really did chip away at militarization, policing, and I would even say global policing and militarization in this moment. There hasn't been a win like that in the country recently. People don't feel like they can go up against the police and the sheriffs, and that's why it took us so long, 6 years, to make this win. But the fact that we did, people should not take it lightly. We should learn from what actually worked and didn't in terms of our strategies leading up in these 6 years, and move on it and build on it, because the police and the sheriff, they all know that this is a win against them and that we accomplished something. So our movements tend to not have a really good way of embracing our wins and victories. And so I'd really encourage all of us to see it as a huge win against militarization policing. And for us as the Arab community, a huge win against Israel. So we were able to actually chip away at a place where Israel played a role and was instrumental in policing and militarization, and something that's been really difficult to raise awareness around in this country, but doing it in a way that was accountable to the anti-policing work that's already happening in the United States.
Thank you so much, Lara. That was also a great overview of where the coalition, how the coalition has grown and strengthened, and the power of the coalition. And setting us up well for talking about where do we go from here. So Tash Nguyen is with the Ella Baker Center, and Tash has also been a part of campaigns that have been pressuring Sheriff Ahern on other fronts, whether that be because of efforts to expand the jail in Alameda County, or around his finances and auditing the sheriff, or immigrant rights issues. So really welcome, Tash, to talk about the overlap as well when you're speaking about why we're engaged in this fight. And thank you for joining us, Tash.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I work at the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, based here in Oakland. And I'm so happy to see some of my homies in Winnipeg here on the webinar. So shout out to the homies in Canada. Yeah. So, at the Ella Baker Center, we're committed to, ending mass incarceration. And so, in Fighting Urban Shield, a program that is run by the sheriff, which is really interesting. It's not a chief of police. It's someone who is committed to jailing and incarcerating people. Seeing the sheriff invested in militarized policing and SWAT training is very concerning to us. The ways in which they're coupling emergency preparedness with militarized policing was very concerning to us. And so that's kind of like what brought us to the table. We've heard year after year of advocacy that all of this abuse and neglect and beating of prisoners inside was happening inside of our jails. And Urban Shield was kind of the training grounds for, the deputies to enact violence on people in a way that is like highly invisibilized. And so in terms of, this particular strategies, tactics, and skills that we brought into the coalition was our strength and background in advocacy and legislative work. We've had many local campaigns in Alameda County where we've had to build kind of close relationships with different supervisors, with different head of department agencies. And so I think we kind of helped the coalition understand, do a power mapping, understand who the players were, get inside information from contacts and relationships that we had, to make the lobbying efforts occur a lot smoother. We also are a membership-based organization who are connected, and our members are connected to other organizations, so different neighborhood groups. We, along with shutting down Urban Shield, we also have a strategy that we're still organizing around to get the city of Berkeley, which is in Alameda County, to pull their police force out of participating in Urban Shield. And many of our members who lived in Berkeley were a part of different neighborhood groups within Berkeley who had been impacted by policing. And so they hosted different house meetings, and we presented at them. We also had members who worked on search and rescue and were also first responders and could, tackle the sheriff's rhetoric and saying, hey, we're training, this is a, state-of-the-art first responder training. And our members were like, actually, no, this only militarizes first response. And I've been to, Katrina and saw the ways in which SWAT and police actually got in our way in our ability to save lives. And so we were able to mobilize people who had this experience, who can speak directly against the sheriffs and different fire departments who are trying to co-opt this rhetoric that these two things had to be conflated. And I think also lifting up, what real community-based emergency preparedness looks like. During, one of our mobilizations against Urban Shield, the coalition also organized an alternatives fair, right? This is what real community preparedness looks like. And we hosted it at Lake Merritt, which is like in the center of Oakland. Right across the street from the county building. And we had, people teach us how to put out a fire, how to build an earthquake kit. These are skills that, nobody in our community really knows how to do. And so we were also being visionary, as well as, working to dismantle this thing that we didn't like. In terms of the base building and organizing, we presented to different ally organizations, interfaith communities from different coalitions that we were also sat in. Alameda County is the 17th largest county in the country. And most people, when they hear about Alameda County, they only know that Oakland and Berkeley are in Alameda County. And that was a lot of the pushback that we were getting from the 5 Board of Supervisors who represent 13 other cities. And so we went over we did presentations in kind of the unincorporated parts of the county where the sheriff polices. We went down to different commuter cities and also worked with community to engage them into this campaign. And then the other thing that we did was we sat on this really annoying task force that was created. It's called the Urban Shield Task Force, and it was created by one of the Board of Supervisors about a year ago as we were, heavily resisting this thing, to say, you know what, the supervisor pulled together a group of 18 people who were supposed to represent the community, to study Urban Shield and to answer these 5 questions around whether it basically meets the needs of the county, what the community impact is, and a whole other list of questions. The 18 people who sat on this task force, about a dozen people had either have something to gain from Urban Shield by literally being like a police chief, somebody who participated in Urban Shield, or someone who had even been a vendor, like a gun vendor at Urban Shield. And so only 6 of us, of the 18, actually represented community, and we agreed to sit in it, to demand transparency, and to also expose how corrupt Urban Shield is, even when they try to bring any type of sort of community oversight. We demanded for those meetings to be public. We demanded for notes to be released. We demanded budget and documents. And we were also able to have face-to-face conversations with a lot of these people who have been participating in Urban Shield since 2007. We also demanded an opportunity for dozens of different community members, and these were people that we were pulling into the coalition, to observe Urban Shield for the first time. There were many attempts by media in the past to observe Urban Shield, and they had been kicked out. And so this was also an opportunity for us to learn that, we're a welcoming county with sanctuary values, but ICE is being trained at Urban Shield. The California Department of Corrections, our prison system, is being trained at Urban Shield. A whole list of countries that have human rights violations are being trained at Urban Shield. And so through this task force, as annoying and bureaucratic as it was, helped us to build the groundwork to be able to go back to the supervisors and say, yo, this thing that you created was total BS. It didn't work, and we are proving to you that Urban Shield is not reformable, and therefore it must end. And so those are kind of like, the strategies and tactics that we employed. And I think along those lines, we also had to do a lot of unsexy work. And that looks like, doing a lot of research and figuring out, what are the life-affirming resources that our communities need? And how do we build a broad coalition to isolate the sheriff? And so, I've worked on fighting the jail expansion. We brought in immigrants' rights groups that were fighting against the sheriff and the way in which he shares information of his prisoners with ICE. And so I think building in very meaningful, participatory avenues of engagement was really important and vital in our victory.
Well, thank you, Tash. Yeah, and I think that those legislative lessons, I'll say, and the experience and the skills that we've built through other campaigns as well as through fighting Urban Shield will become even more important as we move forward and make sure that we maintain this victory. So I want to invite Maisa to chime in now about the tactics and strategies that your organizations have brought to the campaign, and then also the impact and significance for you of this victory. And so Maisa is with Oakland Power Projects as well as Palestinian Youth Movement, and comes to this work as a health worker, and has spoken to really the importance of maintaining urban emergency preparedness in the hands of community rather than in the hands of policing and law enforcement. And so hopefully she'll speak to that as well. Thanks, Maisa.
First of all, thank you all for providing this platform, and thanks to everybody that's on the call today in the middle of the day. So the first thing I just wanted to say was, or just highlight really about what everyone else has said, was just the level of commitment of the coalition has just been astounding. This is one of the first coalitions I've been a part of that has ever been so successful, and it's been really great to work in this atmosphere and in this group, in this coalition with all these other perspectives and organizations, and building off of that. Another thing that I really wanted to say was how important it is for recovery and prevention work as health workers. And it's a shame that something like Urban Shield kind of just co-opted that and said that this is prevention, that this is health work. And as a health worker, it's almost really offensive, because we know that the work that they're doing is not in any way preventative. It's not in any way helping or serving anybody. And so just to start off, as PYM, so like Lily mentioned, I am representing both the Palestinian Youth Movement and Oakland Power Projects. And for PYM, it was really critical for us to make these connections about why Israel was so significant in the role of Urban Shield. And it's significant in us to also recognize the tactics in which the Zionist state uses for expansion. And so specifically in this moment in where they were utilizing their ability to militarize and train police task forces or police forces across the world, to me, this is not any coincidence at all. This is definitely intentional, and especially in the time that we're living in, especially with the attacks on Gaza after 2014 and Ferguson, and I mean, you name it. Each city has faced some form of militarization from the police task force. And to us as PYM, we see this as not a coincidence, but actually something very intentional. And so as the Oakland Power Projects, if you don't know who we are kind of an umbrella and an arm from Critical Resistance. And so we started as really a group of healthcare workers that wanted to be able to take out some of the frustration that people were feeling in terms of like what's going on and how do we actually help people in the health perspective. And so a lot of what we've done as a group, we've been around since 2015. We've held over 25 different workshops, and our workshops have ranged from emergency health, chronic health, which is around opiate use, and then behavioral health. And so those are the workshops that we've been hosting, and we've held many different workshops. We've hosted over 500 community members. And throughout our workshops, we continue to highlight that policing is a health hazard, that the policing state is not, there's nothing broken about the system. And in fact, it is working exactly how it's supposed to and how it was intended. And so as organized health workers, our role really within the coalition and within in some of the work was bringing the health workers to the field, like bringing them along with us and bringing them to Alameda board supervisor meetings, bringing them to city council meetings in Berkeley, in Oakland, wherever we are. And so that was really our role in really showcasing and supporting as a group of health workers that we are invested in the work that the coalition, the Stop Urban Shield Coalition, was part of. We're invested in really looking at what emergency preparedness is, and that we actually need support for emergency training, real emergency training, and real critical life support, and real preparedness. And I'll tell you also, as an EMT, I worked with many people who actually were part of Urban Shield, and even in my scope of medicine, I interact with people a lot who have been a part of Urban Shield, and who you'll find different perspectives. You find different angles of people who really appreciate what they think about it. I remember one of my coworkers was an EMT, and he was talking about how he was made to be like a civilian in the scenarios that they were doing. And so for him, he felt really kind of like it was really abrasive. It was really aggressive, because even though as a civilian, they still frisked him, or they still made him seem like he was a perpetrator. And this was just in a scenario that he was doing. And he felt very uncomfortable. And the more I talk to people in the field who've been a part of Urban Shield, it kind of amazes me the type of, I would say, kind of brainwashing that they make health workers think that this is something that is actually beneficial to them and to their scope of work. And for us, as as people of the community and people that really care, we know that it's not, and we know that the harms that Urban Shield has done to our communities. We've also had people testifying against the police and the sheriff, and really more so in terms of like the harm that Urban Shield has done. And as a coalition, I would say a lot of our work for OPP, it really kind of stemmed from, okay, what do people really want in the community? What are they asking for? And what we found was Critical Resistance did surveys, and they asked people in the community, what is it that you need? And what we found was people were saying they don't want to call 911 because when they call 911, they don't actually get the help that they need. And this is something that I've known for a long time, something as working as an EMT in the county, knowing that there are certain areas that won't necessarily get medical help right away, but would first get police. This is something that I've always kind of known. And so being part of these workshops and kind of giving people the tools and empowering them to know this is also what you can do in case you are in this kind of situation was something that I felt like was really uplifting and something that the people are really hungry for, something that people were really interested in being engaged in. And also to build off of what Tash was saying, the health fair that we had, or how, I don't know how we want to phrase it, but seeing people's reactions or feedback that day to some of the strategies we had. And so like Tash mentioned, we had like earthquake preparedness, we had a CPR CPR, like how to do CPR. There was like some, whatchamacallit, karate, not karate, I forget what it's called. Self-defense, thank you. There was self-defense training. There were so many other trainings that when we saw people's reactions to what we could do, it kind of opened a whole new scope for us. And so personally, I'm committed to seeing what more we could do in that realm. And I'm committed to taking that $2.5 million and turning it into something that, okay, this is actually how we could support our community, and this is what we could be doing. So for me, that's what I'm looking forward to in the future. And this win it's huge for our coalition, but I believe it's huge on a bigger scale too, because we know that if Urban Shield ever tries to start again, or if it comes up into any other city, we have a whole toolkit of how to stop that and make sure it doesn't happen again.
Thanks, Maisa. And I think that's the note that you were just sharing is also a beautiful segue to last but not least, Charlene, who are representing CR Oakland and the anti-policing work group, because as you're talking about, we as communities as well as counties need to build up the emergency preparedness that we want to see, as well as chip away at that policing. So, and that's our work as abolitionists too, is to build up liberatory and life-sustaining mechanisms while we chip away policing and imprisonment. So with that, I'll pass it to our last speaker for this round, Charlene.
Hi, thanks, Lily. So as Lily said, I'm a member of Critical Resistance Oakland and the anti-policing work group and the coalition. So just talking about kind of the tactics and strategies that CR Oakland brought to this coalition, as well as I think maybe kind of contextualizing when the coalition was coming together. CR Oakland was at the tail end of our fight against gang injunctions in Oakland. And so with that fight kind of targeting racialized policing in Oakland, it did also make it made a lot of sense to kind of take part in this coalition, right, which was a clear abolitionist campaign, which would ultimately work to chip away in a big way at the prison industrial complex and racialized and militarized policing on a huge international scale, right? So that was a clear thing for our chapter to participate. So another thing I think around kind of the link between the two campaigns is the approach that was used by CR Oakland in the Southland Junction's campaign was a three-pronged approach of utilizing legislative, media, and grassroots as the three prongs, right, in targeting the gang injunctions. And it was an approach that was very successful and helped the chapter to win that campaign. And it would not have been successful if we just focused on one, right? Like just legislation or just grassroots outreach. And so that was, I think, something that CR Oakland brought into our work in the coalition to stop Urban Shield. And I think Tash sort of spoke to that also around like the legislative piece, like doing lots of legislative research and joining the task force as part of that. I'm going to focus more on CR Oakland taking on leadership in the media and messaging part of it, as well as grassroots outreach. Although these were approaches that were also shared by lots of folks in the coalition. So one of the things, so starting with kind of media and messaging, I think a really important strategy that was used was uplifting like the people's media, right? So not letting kind of mainstream media dictate what Urban Shield was. I mean, first of all, 5 years ago, there was most folks in the county and the country didn't know what Urban Shield was, even though it had been going on for many, many years. And so with the people's media, it was really about uplifting the stories of people who have been impacted by policing and militarization, and making that common knowledge and making that common sense. And it was really reframing Urban Shield to expose it for what it actually was, which is a police militarization and SWAT training run by a racist and xenophobic sheriff. And so I think some of the strategies to do that were in like preparing op-eds and press releases that clearly kind of restated that messaging around what Urban Shield was, and the voices of folks who have been directly impacted, and making sure that those stories like made it into the op-eds and press releases, which were also strategically placed in the media, either leading up to hearings and votes or right after. Another tactic was holding our own press conferences, usually right before a major vote or hearing, and making sure that at these press conferences, we heard the voices of speakers from directly impacted communities, right? So there were usually really rad speakers from AROC leading these press conferences. We often had youth from like 67 Sueños and other, youth organizations in the area, sometimes speaking, sometimes doing poetry, at these press conferences. So that was, I think, a really important part of the media, and that also kind of dovetails with like grassroots mobilization, right? Like, so reaching out to organizations and folks from organizations to be part of these press conferences, training them up, doing spokespeople training for folks who maybe were less experienced with speaking in front of large crowds, to develop their skills as well. So I think another important point also is having really clear talking points for every single mobilization that we went out to. And so these are talking points that were developed collectively within the coalition, and making sure that talking points were handed out to folks so that they could talk and stay on message, right? I think another thing to point out is that the setup of a lot of the board hearings that we mobilized to was very much stacked against the coalition. So typically how it went was the sheriff would have an unlimited amount of time to make a formal presentation, and was able to respond to any questions that board supervisors had for him, whereas the coalition the coalition's only avenue was to speak during public comment, where individual speakers had a very strict timeline of like 2 to 3 minutes to speak. And so the strategy that the coalition developed was to create our own presentation with our talking points, but chunked out into using stacked speakers, right? So ahead of time, identifying point people to speak to each point in our presentation, and stacking them in that order during public comment. And I think this was, and again, making sure that Black and brown folks and directly impacted folks were the ones to also lead in these in the presentation. And I think this was a very effective strategy that was used throughout the duration of the campaign. And then I think kind of moving to the grassroots outreach part of it, not everyone obviously is able to mobilize to these board hearings, which were usually in the middle of the day. So making sure that we were sending regular updates to our thousands of followers, email updates regularly, and ramping that up during important moments. So I think I'm at time, but I can speak more to this impact and significance later.
Awesome. Thanks, Charlene. So thank you all for talking about some of the strategies and tactics used in the campaign over the years. The recent victory that we had on March 27th, the Alameda County Board of Supervisors voted 4-1 to not hold Urban Shield in 2019. After much conversation about the racial profiling of Urban Shield, the divesting from community-based emergency preparedness that had happened because of Urban Shield. And then the Alameda County Board of Supervisors is going to have a committee that will review the broader funding from the Urban Area Securities Initiative grant that goes to Alameda County, and that committee will figure out the best ways to use that grant. So with that said, and following up on what y'all have shared, I think we can understand at least a couple of things about this moment in the campaign. The first is that Urban Shield is emblematic of police militarization, racial profiling, war on terror, the stripping away of emergency preparedness, prevention, and recovery in communities. But it's by no means the only example of this in our communities. The second thing is that we know that people in power will continue to try to hold on to that power, and they do that in no small part with through policing, right? So they're invested in maintaining Urban Shield or another type of program similar to Urban Shield. So my question is, where do we go from here? What next? How do we hold on to this victory? What do we do to continue this work? And I pose it to the four of you, and anyone who feels particularly juiced can jump right in.
Well,
all right.
Tash, you got it. You want to go?
No, you got it. Go for it. I'll fill in the blanks.
I I think as with any win, you want to figure out a way to build on it. And so we don't do this just to strike out Urban Shield. We do this to make a dent in militarization and policing and repression. So to continue to support existing campaigns, whether locally or even in the United States or North America, that are working on similar things, so that we can learn from each other, build on the wins, and also continue to have more wins, essentially. There's a lot of different conversations about how to take on the sheriff more directly, since he is sort of a target of all of this, or centered to some of the issues that we're dealing with, at least in Alameda County. Using this win to make sure, first of all, that they continue to implement it, that we do in fact win. So as with anything, you want to make sure that it doesn't, they don't, fall back on what they promised us. But I would say for us, at least, we're trying to now look into where else can we make a dent? What other issues or areas need some attention, and something maybe we didn't think was possible, but now is possible given that we were able to have this victory? How can we continue to put pressure on exchanges and militarism more broadly, connect this to anti-war, connect this to immigration, to ICE, to different policies of Trump? There's a lot of issues that we're all dealing with. So if we can think of this as a stepping stone to sort of supporting the existing work that we're engaging in, but to think about big visionary campaigns we can take on locally and regionally in order to continue to build towards what it is we're trying to achieve.
Thanks. Tash, you want to jump in?
Yeah. I think something that Ruthie Gilmore says a lot is don't always just focus on winning. Prepare what you need. Prepare for the day after you win. And I think something that's like really significant in what led us to be where we are today is that we didn't make any concessions. We didn't settle for anything less than ending this bad boy. And we also forced the county supervisors to work for us, right? So, and now they have to respond to us. They have to respond to all of the questions, all of the concerns, all of the things that we have when it comes to actually building emergency preparedness now. I think in terms of what's ahead of us, we want to make sure that the sheriff doesn't create like another training called Rural Sword, or something of like the same nature but with a different name. Because I think just studying policing and studying the prison industrial complex, that jailers and cops will just co-opt things in any way that they can, right? So are they going to start focusing on like school shootings now, and how do we prepare for that? And so I think figuring out, Urban Shield is funded through a grant that is housed through Homeland Security. And so, we know community prepared, Homeland Security is not going to fund anything that is about community preparedness, and we don't want money from Homeland Security. And so how do we insist the county supervisors to actually prioritize that in their budgets, which is a moral document? When Urban Shield was created, not only did it create this giant monster, but this giant monster ate up emergency preparedness programs that were really effective. And there was one program called Collaborating Agencies Responding to Disaster. They had like a shoestring budget, but they worked with like 30,000 people a year. And so how do we make sure to bring these things back? We had folks from CARD come and speak. And so how do we actually be working with them now that Urban Shield is hopefully over, to actually like come back and implement this? Because we live in the Bay, we know earthquakes are real. And so, how do we actually prepare for that?
I think one thing I just wanted to say is I'm pretty sure everybody here can attest to the fact that a lot of the times in our organizations or communities, we face a lot of losses, whether they're losses in our homelands or they're here, no matter where we are. A lot of the times, those moments where we're faced with like the greatest atrocities, it's hard to uplift ourselves. And so that's why something like this win in particular was so significant for us, and especially in the time that it came. And for us, or for me in particular, or our coalitions or organizations, is we want to keep feeding off of that. We want to, we want more, like, you know, like what Lara was saying, we want more wins. We want to keep going. And I think something that's really important is that we've recognized is like the people power, and how much we've been able to empower our voices, our narratives, and our impact. And so building off of that, I would like us to continue to keep doing that. And I want to personally be a part of what emergency preparedness actually looks like, especially as a healthcare provider and somebody that sees that, you know, our greatest thing that we should be worrying about really is chronic health diseases. It's not necessarily shootings, but why don't we have real grocery stores in Oakland? That's the type of thing that I'm more committed to talking about and thinking about. What does prevention actually look like, and how do we actually heal the people that are suffering the most? And so for me, for our next steps, is I want to continue to be a part of this work and making sure that the people's voices that need to be heard are heard.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody kind of brought really great points to the table, just kind of echoing that. I think the immediate kind of next steps would be holding the Board of Supervisors accountable to their decision, and making sure, like Tash said, that Urban Shield by another name doesn't happen after 2019. And then, yeah, I mean, thinking about how all this money that you know is now available does go towards life affirming and community building efforts and programs that are not tied to law enforcement, right? And so, like, even outside of the Urban Shield, how do we continue maintaining that? And I think one thing to kind of also that CR Oakland specifically has been working on is our next Oakland Power Project. So Maisa is part of our first Oakland Power Project that is around like decoupling policing from healthcare, and organizing like health workers around that. I think one thing that's been really exciting, even before this kind of major win, is seeing all the smaller wins along the way, right? So in the last 5 years, more and more groups and coalitions of folks have been coming out and speaking out against policing, and untying policing from things like healthcare and emergency services already, right? And so that's really exciting. And so with the second kind of Oakland Power Project, we're building out a platform around a strong abolitionist platform around decoupling policing from emergency readiness and response, right? And so I think this is something that this win against Urban Shield is really momentous, and there is so much energy already in the Bay, and I think nationally also, to kind of build some really beautiful like community-led and community affirming programs around this. So yeah, that's exciting to me too.
Cool, thank you all. We are gonna get into inviting questions and comments from our audience members, participants. I know that there's some people who have been involved in this campaign. There's some people who are calling from different parts of the country or parts of the world. And we want to, among other things, hear your questions, but also your reflections on what other campaigns or efforts are happening that you see as connected to Urban Shield, whether that be locally here in the Bay Area or even internationally, so that we can build some bridges between us in this broader movement. A point about logistics, if you would like to ask a question, if you try to unmute yourself. I think that may require some moderator control, and then you should be able to hop on and speak up. And then just to also note before the first question is that this webinar is being recorded, so keep that in mind when you pose your question or comment as well. And if you are not posing a question, if you could mute yourself, that would be great.
We're not muted, are we? Yeah, we are. Oh, we aren't. Oh my God.
That's Buck.
Our comrades in Canada, we invite you to participate. And I would also just invite the speakers too to answer this question. If you know of campaigns or efforts nationally or internationally that you feel like that could build on this, on the Urban Shield victory as an effort to demilitarize police, I welcome you to answer that as well. And general comments are welcome too from any participant.
If I could just throw in the mix, there's some national conversations and also more local conversations around taking on the 1033 program altogether, which allows weapons and technologies to be surplus weapons from military grade and wars and war making to be brought into local neighborhoods. So I know that that's something that's out there. We're not necessarily working on it, but just wanted to throw it in the mix as something for people to consider.
Mm-hmm. And there is legislation in California now, statewide legislation, to create some control and transparency around local municipalities obtaining those weapons too.
Hi everyone, can y'all hear me?
Yes, welcome.
This is Zakaria. I'm with the Palestinian Youth Movement. And
hi Zakaria.
Hi everyone. Thank you all for everything that you guys have done the past few years. I know I was involved in an action when I lived in the Bay Area with PYM and a lot of our allies as well. So it's really nice to finally see this victory happen because there's been a lot of work. And so I'm very appreciative of it. And there's a lot of great stuff happening all across the country in regards to, ending police militarization and exchanges with Israel in particular as well. I also work with researching the American-Israeli Alliance. We actually provide research specifically for the JVP Deadly Exchange campaign. And so a lot of my work does kind of involve looking at a lot of the partnerships that happen between local police departments and other state and federal agencies that participate in joint trainings. And, Sheriff Ahern actually, trained in Israel before he started Urban Shield, like about 3 years before he did, and attended an Institute for Counterterrorism training in Jerusalem. So in terms of that, I do see a lot of the connections happening between both, the repression of dissidents and also the victories that we're having. So in terms of that, it seems like there's a flurry of activity happening just in these past few weeks. That obviously the Urban Shield victory and Monday night's victory in Durham, North Carolina. It became the first city in the United States to abolish police trainings and exchanges with Israel. So in terms of that, I also see a lot of opportunity since a lot of these exchanges and whatnot are being done, across different agencies like state police, university police, ICE, border police, even transit authorities, FEMA, the DEA, SWAT teams, you name it. Everyone's involved. So it seems like such a huge challenge. I know Lara said and mentioned this. It seems like people don't take that on because it's so scary and it's so big. But when you see these victories, you really realize that how weak they actually are. So in terms of that, I thought, a campaign that would target like the 1033 program, or specifically, it was mentioned the Urban Area Security Initiative, which funded Urban Shield. A lot of them do have like requirements that they any of the funds must be used to basically support terrorism preparedness. So any activities that are implemented have to be focused, or have to be tied, or have to be able to be dually used for both terrorism preparedness or whatever it could be. So in terms of that, I feel like whack-a-mole is kind of a good analogy to this. Like, obviously Urban Shield has been ended, but, it could be renamed, like someone mentioned, Rural Sword or whatever it is. So in terms of not playing that game, I guess my question is, what are some of the maybe main sources of a lot of these programs, and how can we stop basically, how can we stop local communities from needing to even apply to these? Because a lot of them have requirements.
Thanks, Zakaria. And thanks for the work that you're doing with researching those collaboratives. Let's see if there's any other comments and questions, and then we'll open it up to responses. We have an audience that's ready to listen and take in. So are there any responses to Zakaria's question and point about, as I heard it, kind of cutting these collaborations off at the roots, right? How do we get to the source of all of these different programs and impact that? I will throw something in here into the mix, and then start tapping some of our speakers. I think that it does, I would agree that it does feel a little bit like whack-a-mole, as you put it, and then also it can feel overwhelming, right? When we think of the expansiveness of the prison industrial complex and this type of militarized policing, and the growth and the shifts in the nature of the attacks on communities. And I think that cutting it off at its head, or at the roots, however we want to put it, may not be possible now for us, but I think that we can look at this victory not as the slice of victory against Urban Shield that won't continue in 2019, but as the slice of victory of how have we built a strong movement against militarized policing, and how have we really shifted people's minds around the need for investment in community and divestment from militarized policing, and what kinds of connections have we built between, Arab and Muslim communities, Chicano immigrant communities, Black people fighting the daily police militarization in their neighborhoods, and all different communities that are impacted by this violence. So I think that movement building is the victory that we also want to highlight in terms of how we can begin to undo the source of this problem.
Yeah, I was going to say something similarly. I think the impact of a victory like this doesn't just impact Alameda County. I think Critical Resistance sent a really great victory email, I think the day after, on March 28th. And in that victory email is a link of all of the participating agencies in Urban Shield. And if you look at, oh, someone just sent it. Great. And so if you look at that, it impacts all of those jurisdictions that had been attending Urban Shield since 2007, right? And so in California, it's, you know, agencies across California and also across the world. And so now these cities and counties have to think about, shit, like, we can't go to Urban Shield. We can't go to Urban Shield because that county is demanding for community emergency preparedness. Maybe this is something that we should actually take seriously and fund instead. And it feels like indirect, but I think a part of all of this work is also doing the work of changing the narrative and changing the culture. I think abolition and feminism insists on methods of thought and action that urge us to think things together that seem to be separate and to segregate things that seem to naturally belong together. And so as we know that communities are building, you know, health-based responses to emergencies, these are opportunities that all of these jurisdictions have to demand, hey, all of this staff time and money that you spent sending cops to Urban Shield is money that you should send us to come together across the state to talk about a health-based response to emergencies and disasters, right? I also think that, you know, I also think that, you know, as we even think about sentencing reform in the world of, you know, non-reformist reforms to get people behind, home from jails and prisons, we can also begin thinking about clearing the books for what police can arrest people for, right? So that if we're actually clearing the penal codes, we'll actually not have a need for police to respond to anything. And I feel like that's a huge area that somebody should, and maybe somebody is already working on it, but that more of us should be thinking about.
I see a question over here in chat. Is there any way to find out about those agencies participating this year? We do have that information. We can follow up with you. And also, I just want to note, because this wasn't noted before, and you know, as we were going into the March 27th hearing, we did get news that Sacramento Police Department were the winners of, or were reminded that Sacramento Police Department were the winners of last year's Urban Shield SWAT competition, which is important to note because the week before that victory, Stephon Clark was killed by the Sacramento Police Department. And there's been massive outrage and protests against that killing. But do we know that the police officers specifically who were involved in his killing were participants at Urban Shield? No, but we do know that the weapons that are obtained through Urban Shield and the training and the culture of Urban Shield resonates deeper into the police forces that participate and into all policing in our communities. Other questions or comments from participants or from speakers?
Just real quick, my name's Sada. I'm from Jacksonville. I'm with PYM as well as Jacksonville Palestine Solidarity Network. I was curious, I was the one who asked the question in the chat regarding just finding out what agencies are participating. So in Jacksonville, we work with the Jacksonville Community Action Committee, which is pushing a Jacksonville Police Accountability Council, kind of modeled after like other civilian elected police accountability councils that like Chicago's pushing. And we were talking about formulating a campaign to kind of push against like involvement with Urban Shield, because we did find out that Jacksonville Sheriff's Office has attended, I think in 2013 and 15. So we were trying to figure out if they're participating 2018, if there's any way to get that information after this webinar.
Yeah, we should be able, I think we do have the list of participants. I'm looking at Tash now for confirmation, but I believe we have the full list. So yeah, we can follow up with you about that for sure.
It's also on the Urban Shield website.
Oh,
check that out.
Great. Not the Stop Urban Shield website, but the Urban Shield website.
I'm sorry. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Sara.
I was just, did you say the participants for this year on Urban Shield? Because I couldn't find those. I was trying to find them today. And maybe if somebody could help guide me to where that would be.
They're usually not posted right away. Sometimes it's posted a few months before, and then they also update them. And it's not always the most, comprehensive, but there is information that we can gather. And usually we find out after the fact, all the agencies that participated, that information isn't clear usually in advance. But you should be able to find a lot of information on their website, which is a great resource for people trying to challenge it.
Yeah, and we also, because we participated as observers this year, we were able to gain a little bit more access to information than years past, which I think that secrecy helps to maintain the program too. Other questions or comments?
One thing I wanted to say, that I know that we know that the training is happening this year, and so I know as a coalition I haven't heard anything. We don't know exactly what we're gonna do, but I could imagine that we're not gonna just be at home chilling. So I was just gonna suggest or mention that, like, if we do plan something, that if people did want to plan in their own cities, if their police departments are a part of it, that I would encourage them planning something around that in conjunction with whatever we're planning here.
Great idea.
Michael Stack?
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, this is more of a comment, but you may want to comment in return. I see the whole fight on Urban Shield as part of the larger issue of demilitarizing our society. And Urban Shield is a part of militarizing our police, but it's also a piece of the larger culture of militarization that makes it easier for them to sell wars and aggression. And, I see that tied in, for example, with ROTC and the fight for gun control and the ways in which kids are militarized through video games and, where a culture of acceptance of the idea of militarization. And that got me thinking that there are groups working on all these different pieces of it, but I haven't seen anywhere where somebody's tried to bring it all together and to look at the broader ideological construct of militarization and the way it permeates our society and the way it manifests in things like Urban Shield or ROTC in the schools or things like that. So I just wonder if you have any observation about that. I want to say also that I wrote in the chat, if we could get your presentation summarized into talking points that we could send, I'm thinking, for example, in U.S. Labor Against the War, that we could send to our affiliates, because this question comes up in one form or another, even in places where there is no Urban Shield. And it would be very helpful to have something we could give to people. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael. And I agree that would be very useful for all of us and our movements. So hopefully we'll get on that soon. Anyone want to respond to that point?
I would just echo what Michael said. I think that's part of what was so compelling about this campaign, is it touched on so many different issues in our society, and really was able to galvanize people in multiple sectors and communities in ways we haven't done in a while here in the Bay Area, at least in particular. So I don't have an answer necessarily in terms of how to continue to build on that or what else we should be thinking about, but I do think there are some potential opportunities to build on.
I want to open it up for one last comment. Is there anyone with a burning comment or question? Well, with that, I will say thank you all to our speakers, Maisa, Charlene, Tash, and Lara, for joining us on this call, and really just reiterate the power of the Stop Urban Shield Coalition and all of the organizations that have participated in this campaign over years, and we'll probably continue to participate in this campaign for years to come because our fight is not over. If you are in the Bay Area, we will be having a coalition victory celebration coming up probably in the beginning of May. So please sign up for announcements on our website or contact us at stopurbanshield@gmail.com, and we'll let you know about that. And then I also want to just announce that our next critical resistance donor call is going to be on the topic of the policing of migration, immigration detention, ICE, and immigration imprisonment and the border walls, and looking at how the control of migration is a part of the prison industrial complex, and we must also abolish borders as well. So we'll be hearing from different organizers in that realm and talking about those connections. And if you're on CR's mailing list, you should be getting information out about that. And we encourage you to support the organization and join as a donor to also join these future donor calls. You can go to criticalresistance.org/subscribe if you want to sign up for our mailing, and we'll send out information about the Stop Urban Shield celebration as well. So thank you all very much for participating, and look forward to more work together and more victories against militarized policing. Yeah, we also encourage you to reach out to the other organizations that have been present on this call. Look up ways to support them. So that's the Arab Resource and Organizing Center, Palestinian Youth Movement, and the Ella Baker Center. So please get involved if you're not already. And thank you.